Good morning, afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today for this webinar on invasive alien species, and in particular on the importance of rapid response, management, and eradication measures in addressing one of the most significant drivers of biodiversity loss globally. For IUCN, tackling invasive alien species is a long-standing priority. Preventing their introduction and spread is not only essential for conserving biodiversity, but also for protecting human health, food security, livelihoods, and economies. The impacts of invasive species are far-reaching, affecting ecosystems, communities, and ecosystem resilience across regions and sectors. Across the Union, IUCN's commitment to tackling invasive alien species aligns strongly with the ambitions of the CUMI Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, particularly Target 6, which calls for the prevention, reduction, and mitigation of invasive alien species impacts through effective management and eradication measures. We support this work through a range of technical resources, guidance, and scientific tools for invasive alien species management. One important example is ICAT, the Environmental Impact Classification for Alien Taxa, the IUCN global standard for assessing the environmental impacts of alien species outside their natural range. Tools such as these help strengthen evidence-based decision-making and prioritization for governments and practitioners. Building on this broader commitment, I would also like to introduce the European Invasive Alien Species Rapid Response Fund, which is co-funded by the European Commission and implemented through the IUCN Save Our Species program. The fund was established recently to strengthen implementation of the EU legislation, the EU Invasive Alien Species Regulation, by supporting rapid eradication measures that can respond quickly to early stage invasions. As many of you will know, acting early is often the most effective and most cost-efficient approach. Beyond financial support, the fund also provides capacity development and technical assistance while connecting our implementing partners on the ground with expertise from the IUCN Species Survival Commission Invasive Species Specialist Group. In this way, the initiative not only supports immediate action, but also strengthens long-term capacity and knowledge exchange across the region. Importantly, the current call for proposals is still open. It opens until February 2027 or until the whole funding envelope has been exhausted, providing an opportunity for eligible organizations, national and local authorities to access support for rapid eradication efforts. Today's webinar will explore many of these themes in greater depth. We will focus on the importance of rapid response, practical management approaches, and eradication efforts, while also reflecting on the relevance within the European Commission legislation and policy context, and also broader biodiversity goals. I hope today's discussions will help foster collaboration, exchange practical insights, and reinforce the importance of coordinated action on invasive alien species across Europe and beyond. With that, I would like now to hand over to our facilitator, Aileen Mill, Professor of Modeling, Evidence and Policy at Newcastle University, who will guide us through today's session. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Anna, for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning to facilitate this webinar. I am just going to give you a brief overview of the context, and then we'll pass on to some speakers and panelists for their presentations, followed by some discussion. So we know from the IPBES Alien Species Assessment that was published back in 2023 that invasive alien species have widespread impacts. The main messages from there that the invasive species are a huge global problem and that the impacts can be felt across both biodiversity, human well-being, and the economy. And we know that the ways that these 37,000 known invasive alien species can impact biodiversity can be through a wide range of mechanisms. It could be through competition with other native species, could be through predation or herbivory, or through reconstituting ecosystems, often resulting in broad-scale dominant monocultures. We know that these impacts can vary depending on the situation that invasive alien species are present in, and that these impacts are acutely felt on islands in particular. While we haven't got a full, complete ICAT assessment for every single one of those 37,000 species, we do know from the ones that we have observed and that we have data on that they are impacting on native species, and they've led to up to 60% of global species extinctions that can be attributed to either in whole or in part to invasive alien species. And the complexity of the interactions and impacts that species have mean that the range of taxa that can be affected is very broad. However, we know that while the trends of invasive species are increasing, we also know that we have the knowledge base and the tools to be able to change this, and that we need to act early and act fast to be able to prevent further spread and impact and increase management costs. And this is why we're here today. So we'll go to the next slide. We can see why are different ways in which the invasive alien species can spread. We know that across all biomes, different drivers can act at different stages of invasion. So from transport to introduction, establishment and spread. And that there are a range of drivers, both direct and indirect, but of particular note is where their interactions can facilitate the establishment and spread. So the last two columns here, we can see that the dials for changing land use and sea use and climate change are particularly worrying for that spread stage. When these are combined with the uncertainty about some of these indirect drivers, such as social and cultural, demographic and governance factors, this again points us towards the need for acting early and acting fast. If we go to the next slide, you can see the typical invasion curve. And here this highlights the need to tackle populations when they're small and localized before that increased spread, before that curve really takes off. And sometimes that can be exponential and sometimes it can be super fast. This reinforces the wording of the Global Biodiversity Framework text, particularly around Target 6 that we heard about earlier. And here the part that I highlighted is that need for preventing the introduction and establishment of priority species. So it's really focusing, if you just click the next slide, you can see it really focuses on that early part of the invasion curve where we need to be looking at these small localized populations to prevent their introduction and spread. This diagram maps the various actions that can be taken to implement or address Target 6 in the Global Biodiversity Framework. And this comes from the Comprehensive Invasive Alien Species Toolkit that was published by the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, which you can access via that QR code. And you'll see there's lots of training materials there, etc. as well. But importantly, for today, the emphasis is on that action on surveillance and early detection and rapid response that will enable us to tackle invasive species at that small and localized phase. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I'd like to just move on and introduce you to today's speakers. So first we're going to hear from Tim Adrians, who's an ecologist at INBO in Belgium. And then we're going to hear from a couple of recipients of the fund about their projects. So a couple of case studies there, one from Mika Hujwas and one from Daniel Kansky. So looking forward to hearing about their particular projects. So Mika's project's in Belgium and focuses on the early stage population of invasive American bullfrogs in Belgium. And Daniel's project is based in Croatia, where we'll be hearing about managing lionfish. So quite diverse. Now we'll introduce those after we've heard a bit more about the fund and the intentions from Tim Adrians.
Thank you so much, Aileen. Yes, my name is Tim Adrians. I work in Belgium on management of invasive alien species, and I'm in the advisory board of the Rapid Response Fund of IUCN, which I think is an incredibly important initiative. Next slide. Next, please. So I would like to convince you, if you are not already convinced, that rapid response needs to become a mentality, and especially so in the conservation community, because I strongly believe that an aware conservation community can beat the cost of waiting and also intrinsically act faster. Yes, please. But not before introducing you to what is it that we are talking about. Next slide, please. And that's eradication. And according to the unified frameworks on management that we have in the scientific literature, it's, of course, we are talking about the removal of an entire population from an area of interest with especially no immediate risk of reinvasion. In other words, we know invasive species, they in such a way that they don't come back. But in fact, when we look at that management objective, there is a number of related terms like functional eradication, rapid eradication, and what we are going to be addressing today is the combo of early detection and rapid eradication. Next, please. And that management objective is easily understood. So it needs to be nuanced a bit. What is rapid eradication? Because you can imagine with top gudgeon on the left top side there that has a very widespread population in Flanders, for instance, that you can hardly speak about eradication. That's going to be control. But for the Chinese muntjac below, where we just have a few patches, yeah, that's eradication. Whether it's rapid or not can be under discussion. But look on the right-hand side, you have some examples of species where your management objective would actually be containment. So for eastern baccaris, for instance, we want to keep it in halophytic vegetations near the dunes, near the sea. But actually, to contain it, we also need to rapidly eradicate any peripherous populations outside the core area. And the same is true for our massive bullfrog population in the Nete River Valley, of which we'll hear the management approach by Mieke explained. Next, please. So why are we doing rapid response and why does it need to become a mentality? Well, first of all, we know it's more cost effective, and our American colleagues have given us some appraisal of that. Eradication provides up to 25 times greater economic returns than long-term control. Still, prevention, of course, is better than cure, but we can't do that in a three-step hierarchical approach. We should move up our game, and eradication is the first one. Second, next slide, please. It's also more animal friendly. As you can see on this graph, which projects the monk parakeet population before the cull in Barcelona, it goes up in the 1980s from 50 birds to somewhere around 5,000 birds. So it's obviously more interesting to act earlier on that invasion curve, so we don't have to kill so many animals. Next, please. And lastly, rapid response is also sometimes simply mandatory, and luckily so. For instance, in Europe, it's mandatory for any new occurrence of a union list species on the territory. And this also works the other way. If it's not mandatory and the species is not listed, this can be a legal barrier to implementing rapid response. Yes, please. Okay, some common themes and misconceptions from my experience with running eradication projects that I want to mention to you. First, rapid response, it sometimes means you have to use the most effective methods at your disposal, and they are not necessarily the most humane ones. And an example I'm giving you here is the rapid eradication we're currently running with support of the fund on the African clawed frog on the border with France, where we have to use quicklime to give the animals a pH shock and bring those aquatic ecosystems in a better state. Next, please. But sometimes lots can be done with very little degree of intervention, such as here. An aware hunter recognized the cane toad and just took action all by himself and reported and documented this in their journal. This now cane toad might not have established because the environmental conditions are not right for this species in our region, but still it shows that an aware community can act relatively fast with relatively simple means. Yes, please. Another example is this school teacher that had an educational pond on the parameters of the school and dealt very promptly with an aquarium dump of Pleurodeles waltel, which is a salamander occurring in Iberia and we didn't want in our region. Yes, please. And it can be as simple as a few animals walking into a trap. This way we have prevented American mink from establishing in Flanders, and also we can deal quite rapidly with incursions of fluffy animals like this American red squirrel, which is meanwhile almost listed on the union list. Of course, these animals, if it's just a few individuals, they can be rehomed to keep up the public support and not having to use lethal methods. Next, please. Another example, this is the person we work with for shooting our ruddy ducks, which are under eradication, but we can also quite flexibly ask this person to deal with, for instance, the sacred ibis. And actually, no one objected to this action, especially not since spoonbills started to breed on this artificial island, and this ibis was observed predating on their eggs. Next, please. Now, another misconception is, or maybe a question can be, what is rapid? This is an example of a pre-EU regulation rapid response against the palace squirrel introduction in a suburban park in West Flanders. And actually, this was not a state-of-the-art rapid response. I would say it was a first attempt at a rapid response. You can see that it took us 5 years from 2006 to 2011 to capture 250 squirrels. And this had to be done in several trapping campaigns using wildlife cameras and baited traps. Next, please. And it also came at considerable expense, actually. So although we might think it has a very good return on investment, rapid response is not always cheap, and you need to foresee the necessary means, for instance, in this case, to cover the human resources needed for trapping. Next, please. But it can be successful even if it's not cheap or not perceived as very cheap, but you have to consider that word cheap in light of the prevented damages you would have in time. And this is an example of an aquatic plant, Kabomba, a water weed that was promptly removed from an urban brook in Flanders. And this has cost 45K, but if you split that bill amongst the different actors, it becomes much more bearable, and you prevent a lot of damages in time. Next, please. Okay, so how can we go about when we have to make such decisions? Well, I think it's super important that we realize that sometimes success can be unrealistic. And that's why we run feasibility assessments. And I think it's always a good idea when you're dealing with a new incursion, you run such a quick assessment of what is feasible in terms of eradication. Next slide, please. And as an example, there is no better species to talk about than Vespa velutina, the yellow-legged hornet. I guess everyone knows it by now. Well, already before the invasion in 2019, we knew that the species was going to be very difficult to manage because we performed the feasibility assessment. And actually, we could assume that when we find the first nest, it's probably not feasible anymore, even to eradicate the species, which links to the very low detection thresholds of such nests. As you can see, when the leaves are on the trees, it's quite difficult to detect the presence of such a secondary nest. Yes, please. Despite this, we have been able, although we couldn't eradicate the species, we have been able to slow down the spread. So as you can see from this example, it's not because you can't rapidly eradicate that you have to assume your management intervention is a failure or is going to be a failure. There might be other options, other management objectives that are really sensibly applied to the species at hand. Yes, please. And interestingly, it's also good to look at some examples where it didn't work, where the machinery for rapid response did not ignite. And I'm giving you this very recent example of a African white ibis. Everyone knows the sacred ibis, but this species very little people will have heard of in Europe. It's not on the union list, but it's an ibis. It probably has comparable impacts. Well, this species wasn't on the radar, although it has started breeding in my region for a few years. So this shows that an aware community needs to also be on the lookout for new species, and there should be a mechanism for people to report such new risky invaders. Yes, please. Another example of a species undealt with is this hybrid orchid. In a conservation concern area, in a nice heathland area in the west. Yes, please. And also this common milkweed, which you might know from North America, which is a grassland invader. It's the host plant of the famous monarch butterfly. It's starting to spread in our region, and we will be looking at actors and funding to tackle this at an early stage of invasion. Next slide. So what's a typical early detection and rapid response system supposed to look like? There are a lot of things on the board here, and I will not cover all of them, but I'll go through some of the most important examples of what I think such a system should entail. Next slide. The first one is to know what is coming to you. You need to actually be on the lookout of species that can be considered ecologically risky. And for that, there are numerous examples, such as the protocol ICAT, which has been developed and adopted by IUCN and Aileen mentioned, but there are also other systems like ISEA, Harmonia Plus, and other scoring systems. And actually, you can invent your own, basically, based on the criteria you deem important. Next slide, please. There is also the possibility to implement pipelines that can have statistical backbones, or simply to look at the occupancy of species, such as is done for red listing processes. To use risk maps these days, you can find incredible amounts of information on the internet to make your own assessment of what species are coming to you, what new alien species potentially risky are detected newly on your territory or are emerging and coming out of a lag phase. Yes, please. The second step, when you know what's coming to you, is to gather all of these occurrences. And of course, GBIF is a very interesting hub where a lot of information from different databases is coming together. And there are systems that you can use, such as this early warning system, which will be extended to the European scale, to get alerts of those risky species into your mailbox. Yes, please. So this leads to the action itself, and we call that the response chain. It's actually the sequence of actions, actors, and responsibles that have to get into in line to actually deal with an invasive species incursion. And so that goes from information over an alert to the action, and then, of course, also good documentation of what happened and whether it's a success or a failure is quite essential to learn from previous experience. Yes, please. And I'm showing you just for your appraisal or to have an idea of what this looks like. It can be a very, very simple scheme that has been adopted by a range of actors and that outlines every step in the process, from the reporting of a new ruddy duck on a lake to the responsible person within or outside the agency that has to deal with it. Yes, please. So I'm getting to some sort of a conclusion. From my experience, what I can see in the rapid response domain as clear challenges is typical that despite them being more cost effective, they are not necessarily cheap nor easy. And mostly some hindrances occur, and I've called that paralysis by analysis. In the beginning, everyone looks at one another. That's a typical phase. No one knows who is responsible for this new species. No one knows the species, so you have to, this information gathering at the first stage is quite important. Quite often, people will be looking at the landowner to say, it's not my problem, it's your problem. So this points to a lack of buy-in from stakeholders. Linked to that is, of course, limited capacity. And I think that's one of the most important things with rapid response. If you want to organize it well, it's also a good idea to have a dedicated team or staff that can work cross-taxa, that can work cross taxonomic and administrative boundaries, and that has a mandate to actually implement these actions. Fatalism.
Tim, could I just ask you to wrap up, and okay, we can come back to some of this in the discussion, sure. I think, but it'd be great to hear from the experiences of Danielle.
Sure, I will do. Okay, thank you. That's more or less what I had to say.
Fantastic. So
I'm sorry.
Yeah, these are really good points. I think we will come back to this in the discussion point, and we can maybe bring this slide back up after we've heard from them as well, maybe with some of the discussion points. So I think we'll move on and hear from both Mika and Danielle and about their projects. And then we'll move to this sort of panel discussion. We might come back to some of the points that Tim has there, which will be great discussion points, I think, at that stage. I've seen a couple of people putting questions into the chat. Please do that. And we've got a team that will be collecting those questions. So some of them will be answered straight off. Some of them will be reserved for the question and answer session that will follow the panel discussion. So if there's things that are popping up into your head, please do make use of that chat facility and add your questions there. But let's move on and hear from Mika, all about the bullfrog management. Fantastic.
Yeah, hello. My name is Mika Hogewijs and I work for the province of Antwerp, and in the project we are working to remove an isolated group of American bullfrog. Next slide, please. In Flanders, the American bullfrog mainly lives in an area around the river called Grote Nete. And you can see on the map, the core area is in red mapped. And there are also several smaller clusters elsewhere in Flanders. And our control strategy focuses on two tracks. We eradicate the isolated populations, and we are trying to pushing back the bullfrog at the edges of its range at the river called Grote Nete. And between 2020 and 2025, we removed more than 550,000 animals, including tadpoles, juveniles, and adults. And in some isolated populations, places like Hoogstraten, Ravels, and Kasterlee, we found almost no bullfrogs in recent years. So that's great news. It means these groups are now under control or even gone. Next slide, please. Yeah, and in the project area, we are going to work with this grant. It's located at the Flemish Ecological Network east of the channel Dessel-Kwaad-Mechelen. And this population of bullfrog is currently very small and isolated. And because of its concern of a local and isolated population, it's not yet widespread. This is the moment to intervene before the bullfrog becomes wider spread, like we have already seen near the river Grote Nete. And now, thanks to the project grant, we now have more resources to proceed thoroughly. And in the area, there are 61 ponds. Next slide, please. The majority of the ponds of the project area are privately owned. So a first step we already have taken is to contact all the owners and inform them about the project and the bullfrog. And as you can see in the picture, a large number of the ponds are fenced and secure with gates and locks. So therefore, asking for and obtaining cooperation is a very important first step. Next slide, please. Afterwards, then we will take water samples in all of the ponds, and we will use eDNA as a first step. We will map where the bullfrogs are present in the project area, and then we are going to do this in June, and then the water samples are going to be examined in the lab. And in addition, we also already have launched a campaign, a call to find volunteers, because we are looking for people who are willing to check and monitor the environment for the presence of bullfrogs within a 2-kilometer radius around the project area, so within a buffer zone. Next slide, please. And then once we have the lab results, we will start removing the bullfrogs from the affected ponds. We will catch bullfrogs in all life stages using pike nets. And after the captures are completed, we will check again using eDNA analysis, and then check if there are removed, if all bullfrogs are removed. Next slide, please. So what have I learned over the years is that gaining access to private land is vital. We learned that taking a water sample is a great icebreaker to start a conversation with owners. It is not possible to survey all ponds using only pike nets, so eDNA is therefore a fantastic technique to determine where and in what concentrations bullfrog are present. This allows us to prioritize breeding ponds during the breeding seasons for the best results. And also communication, it's very, very important. Creating awareness is like essential. We use press releases, posters, and information meetings so that people learn about the impact of the bullfrog, so they can recognize it, the species, and they can report new sightings. And then our future goal is a multi-year strategy to ensure the bullfrog does not return. And we will do this under the support of the Flemish regulation starting this year in 2026. And that was it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mika. It's a really interesting project. And I think we'll come back to touch on some of the points that you've highlighted there, both about the sort of collaborative nature of these projects, but also about the awareness and information sharing that you've discussed there. Let's hear from Daniel next. We're going to switch another aquatic species, but this time a marine species. So we're going to switch to lionfish this time. I'm excited to hear about this project. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you. So thank you for this. I would like firstly to thank the IUCN for this opportunity actually to work on the field on eradication, or at least trying to control this important species. And thank you for this opportunity to present here. So what we have done in Croatia so far is that we, since we applied and got the grant, this grant beginning of this year in February, we started with several activities, which I will go through. So this is actually the first this kind of project in Croatia in Adriatic Sea dealing with this species. So please, next slide. I will just briefly explain what is going on with lionfish in the Mediterranean, although probably most people know. So Pterois miles is the fish species from the Indo-Pacific, which came into Mediterranean through the Suez Channel. It was not present for a long time ago until the temperatures increased in last 2 decades, and then the rapid spread started throughout the Mediterranean. As you can see on the map, this map is downloaded from iNaturalist, which is a citizen science platform, and those records are inputted by the citizens. And you can see the fish came all the way to Croatia, to the middle of Adriatic, and the first record was in 2021, and now we have numerous records, and people are now stopped even counting. So basically, this is the problem, which is very well connected with the climate change. and it is extremely difficult to tackle because of the huge environment, underwater environment, and we think that this is the best first step actually to try to understand what is going on and how this is going to affect not only ecology but also economy of the Mediterranean countries. Next slide, please. So what we have done so far, because this was the first time that we are dealing with something like this together with the administration, national administration, the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Natural Conservation. We actually agreed with them that we got, as an NGO, that we got a license that we can go underwater with scuba tanks and weapon. It's called Hawaiian Spear. The equipment similar to the spear gun that we are trying to find lionfish while diving and shoot it with and kill it on site. So basically, that in European legislation you cannot go diving underwater and with this kind of equipment. So we need to have special licenses, which were granted as a license for scientific fishing to our NGO. And we had a first before we went to the trip. Also, we had a lot of meetings with both the national administration and our partners, which are actually two NPAs, National Park Mljet, Nature Park Telaščica, two Natura 2000 sites, and Institute of Oceanography and Fisheries. So we developed the protocols, what we want, how to deal with this problem, and we started first with the next slide, please. We started first, we engaged with the local community, spearfishing community, because those people are spending a lot of time underwater catching fish. This is very popular hobby in Croatia, and we tried to use this platform to find out how many lionfish we have in the sea. So basically, 1 month ago, we went on a spearfishing competition, and we asked the people in the spearfishing club to put the lionfish in the list for points. And the idea was that to motivate spearfishing community to fish lionfish during the spearfishing competition, but also during the personal hunt, because lionfish is an edible species, and actually, while you are fishing it, you can eat it afterwards. This first spearfishing competition, it was held in down south of Croatia in Orebić, and it was 20 people diving for 5 hours, and they found only one lionfish, but they were not. It actually escaped. But it's a good baseline that we know that what is happening now in the beginning of the year or in the cold period when the water is below 20 degrees, the lionfish is not very active. So it is very hard to find and to catch. Next slide, please. Then we went on the NPA Mljet. Also, that was 2 weeks ago. It was a team of 6 people, actually 7 people for 5 days, and we had 2 dives a day with scuba tanks, and we covered a lot of area, and we found in all of this period only 3 lionfish. So we found and caught 3 lionfish with this equipment that we are using, and you can see it on the photo. And basically, we expected much more, because from the last year, we had a lot of people calling us and saying about this situation, that this fish is everywhere on the south of Croatia. But luckily, we found only 3 specimens, which we removed. It is really important to understand that when you are planning this kind of operation, it needs to be in optimal period. And when the sea temperatures are below 20 degrees, it is not optimal. So it is just waste of resources, because going on the islands in Croatia is getting very expensive for any team of 6 people anywhere. Next slide, please. So for us, it is very clear that these activities are that we need to be real, and we need to manage our expectations. And nobody ever removed completely lionfish from the marine environment. Not only lionfish, but also other invasive species. It is extremely complex. But what we are trying to communicate with this project now to the general public and also authorities is that we need to protect species which can be predators for lionfish, which are numerous large fish like groupers, moray eels, but also octopus, and many of marine species which are currently overfished. And we focused on marine protected areas actually to promote that healthy environment and abundance of predators will have a chance to slow down invasion of not only lionfish but also other invasive species, because there is more than 100 species coming through Suez to Mediterranean Sea. So basically, by keeping our MPAs healthy, we are hopefully reducing the spread of invasive species. But also, what we are doing right now is we are communicating a lot to the society and through the social media and also other online media about this problem. And hopefully, the society is going to recognize what is going to happen, because we clearly can see what happened in Cyprus or Greece, and we can expect that this is going to continue to happen in Adriatic and the rest of the Mediterranean, and prepare ourselves about not only manage these species, but how we are going to manage our fisheries, how we are going to manage our MPAs, because this is going to be one of the dominant factors in marine environment, because this fish is eating whatever it goes into their mouth, and it is completely cleaning the reef from not only other fish, but also shrimps, mollusks, whatever it can fit in their mouths. So basically, it is a very complex situation, but we are grateful that we had opportunity to get this funding, and hopefully we are going to develop the system where we are going to have people going into sea in the MPAs, but with the authorities of MPAs present, because it is not easy just to send people with the weapons underwater, because then it's not simple to control it. But with the systems that we are developing, hopefully we are going to get some positive results. So basically, this is it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much, Daniel. That's fascinating, and a very challenging environment to be working in, and difficult tools and processes as well. So really great to hear about that. And I think across the various species that we've been hearing about, and particularly the case studies, thinking about detection and surveillance is really critical. And just that you know, the number of hours that you've spent underwater looking for lionfish and not finding them is somewhat positive, but it needs to happen to be able to catch the species early and act fast. Okay, so we are now ready to move into our panel discussion session. So we've got on the screen everyone that you've heard from this morning. The chat is active, so you can put your questions and answers into the chat. We'll just start with a bit of a panel discussion between the speakers to begin with, and then we'll move into addressing some of the audience questions afterwards. But what we've heard from all of the projects and the many examples that Tim was able to share with us was that it's not just one person or one organization that's needed in a rapid response. It needs collaboration. It needs many different organizations and sometimes governance and legal frameworks to be able to coordinate a rapid response. So I wonder whether you could think about maybe some of those partnerships that you've had to create, and where some of the biggest sort of bottlenecks or challenges have been in terms of maybe getting access, landowner permission, or permissions to be using the tools and techniques that you want to be using, for example, the spearfishing with scuba kit. So what might people face in terms of trying to get the right partnerships together to carry out a rapid response? So that's an open question to anyone, but maybe we'll start with Tim, just in terms of the breadth of projects that you've been thinking about. Are there any commonalities in terms of what makes a good partnership?
What makes a good partnership? Very good question, Aileen. A very good partnership is, in my opinion, a partnership where everyone's committed to the case. Okay, and in my opinion, people sometimes are in such partnerships for very different reasons, but still they find common ground. As an example, for instance, this Pallas squirrel incursion that we were dealing with. Okay, the conservation community in my institute, we were there for the biodiversity impact of the species, but the local municipality had to be convinced on other grounds. And when we could tell them that ornamental trees, for instance, would be impacted in that park, and this would cause more safety issues and health and safety issues with recreational activities in that park, they were easily convinced. So it is a matter of finding that trigger point, and that can be an individual getting a response going and finding the right people, but you do not necessarily need to be all on the same line in terms of why you think the species is problematic.
That's a good point, actually. So it might be that there's diverse interests in having the shared outcome. As to why that
especially with, for instance, with water managers, when you're dealing with aquatic freshwater plants, they're interested from the perspective of waterway management, riverbank stability, erosion, the water flow, the hydrology, rather than the impact on native species, for instance. But there's always a way to find common ground.
That's interesting, yeah. So the biodiversity impact is something that we, as ecologists, we might be thinking about, but actually other sectors have got very different interests in terms of managing invasive species. What about you, Daniel, in terms of partnerships? You've mentioned that the lionfish were, sort of ruthless in terms of what they eat, and they're devastating the reef. So obviously, recreational divers are going to be very aware and interested in this project. But what other partners did you have involved in the project aside from recreational divers?
Well, for us, we have many partners in Croatia because this topic is very interesting for the various group of people. Mostly the spearfishing and fishing community in general, they are all in the nature all the time, and they have huge outreach through the social media. So they are the first group that we are targeting, but also national administrations, as I said, they are very into these things because, of course, they have pressure from European Union to provide some results, but also they want to do something for our country and for Adriatic Sea. So basically, they are helping us all the way. First, by giving the licenses, which are really not easy to get usually, but we got everything without any problem. And scientific community, although we are talking that we don't have same perspective of the problem, but we are all doing our best and to at least tackle something, and we are finding the common ground, absolutely. And basically, I mean, everybody for this species in Croatia is very
Oh, I think we might have just lost Daniel there. We'll maybe come back to him if his signal improves, but maybe I could move to Mika. So I was particularly taken by the fact that many of the ponds that you're trying to access to get to the bullfrogs are on private lands or behind gates or locked away, etc. But you're using the eDNA as a method to sort of engage and get that conversation going. Well, we'll test your water and have a look. I think that's really an interesting approach and particularly valuable in gaining that trust, I guess, from
yes, it's we try to gain trust because it's very important. They need to know about the species, and therefore we in the years we're working with bullfrog, we see that when people get to know the species, like in the news when they are telling something about it, we see that it's more easy to gain trust when I write them a letter and they know already the species. They easily say, yes, you can come to take a water sample. We also have seen that just saying we are going to put fights in the ponds, they say, oh no, it's too invasive to do so. So gaining trust by putting by taking a water sample is we see it's a method that works very well.
Apologies for the technical glitch and having to restart, but hopefully everybody's been able to get back into join us again. And I think we'll move into our sort of question and answer session. So I encourage people who have got questions about the fund, about the topics that the speakers have been presenting on. If you could pop those into the chat, we'll do our best to get those answered by the panelists or other members of the team. So maybe just to sort of, my screen now, just to kickstart some of the questions, maybe I could ask Tim, you know, what actions would you like to see at a European level to support early detection?
Well, first of all, to provide people in the conservation community with a good early alert tool is a good one. And it's interesting for you to know that this is underway. So you will have that within the year. Normally, you should have a first prototype of a early alert tool, which should be flexible enough to allow you to receive for an area of interest records of a species of interest. What Europe is also doing is work on novel detection techniques, some of them very, very sensitive and very efficient, like eDNA that Mieke mentioned, but there's other stuff ongoing, like roadside monitoring of invasive plants with high-speed cameras. There's a lot of artificial intelligence work being done. And there is an awful lot of citizen science all across Europe also, which yields very interesting records of invasive alien species. What is, however, lacking, and that might be a bit of a message to the scientific community here and also research funders, is formal monitoring schemes, such as the ones we have in plant health, for instance. So for the not so accessible species for the citizen scientists, for instance, it would be interesting to have formal schemes, for instance, with wildlife cameras on fixed locations, but also eDNA sampling designs that would allow us to, with a certain detection threshold, detect incursions of risky species. So my main recommendation in this respect would be that formal monitoring schemes with a statistically decent backbone are a good idea to implement.
Excellent. So I think there's a lot of things going on there in terms of novel approaches, but also about you know, having systems in place to be able to capture information from a wide variety of sources. That's really interesting. Thanks, Tim. We're getting lots of questions coming in now, which is great. And we'll see if we can work through those. So for Mieke, given the general wide awareness of your project, was there anything, any concern of the bullfrogs being collected for private collections or through illegal pet trade?
No, we don't think so. They just, we think the introduction most likely occurred when a bullfrog was a stowaway in a fish introduction, and it came accidentally into one of the ponds and then escaped.
Okay, thank you. Daniel, are you able to hear us on, is your microphone working? Yeah, I was just wanting to check. Super. So for your project, you were talking about the challenges of being able to use spear guns underwater. And we've had a comment from somewhere else in the world where capturing or shooting of invasive bird species has divided public opinion. So maybe you've got some experience of resources where you can that can be used to engage members of the public or local communities I know the question was about birds and yours is about fish, but maybe there's some commonality there.
Well, I mean, it's as I said before, it's much easier for me because to deal and to tackle lionfish because it's also considered a food, and this is something where you will have vast majority of people supporting the killing and shooting of the animal, unlike birds or other animals where people have more empathy towards them, especially NGOs and people who are supporting NGOs. So. I don't have experience in removing birds, but I think that the biggest for us, the biggest component of communication towards people is the damage to the environment that this species is doing. So once that general public is aware that if we don't do anything, that this species is going to affect negatively our local species, this is I think the main key component actually for any action, because also we had some comments on the social media, what are we doing shooting animals in the MPAs, but you will always get something like this, and this is if you have a solid reason for doing that, I don't think that should be an issue.
Yeah, super. Tim, do you have anything to add on resources for engaging public and local communities?
Well, that's obviously quite important, and I think the first question you have to ask yourself is to what extent do I want to communicate this? And then when the answer is yes, I clearly want to communicate this, it's a question of what's my target audience and how do I reach them and what is the message I'm going to give them. And I know it's not an easy task, but from my perspective, even if you anticipate some drawbacks in the beginning in terms of public support, in the mid and long term, it's still better to just be honest about what you're doing. As I said, it's really about creating a mentality. And if we ourselves as project PIs or initiators are not honest about what we are doing, we will never get to that mentality. Even if it means in the short term, some projects will face public opposition and be slowed down or even fail. But that's maybe more of a personal appreciation. So I think in terms of resources, if you have the opportunity to really build a project team, it's a good idea to approach communications offices and involve these people in drafting a strategy. And it's also, if you go through the IUCN Rapid Response Fund, which I would really recommend, highly recommend, it's very clear in the project application that you have to think about all of these aspects beforehand.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I think it's really important, this communication, and it's been throughout all of the presentations and all of the topics, making sure that awareness raising is there throughout the process. That's great. So just on the sort of Rapid Response Fund, what makes a Rapid Response initiative worth funding? How do you know you've got a good project? I guess this could be for anyone, but Tim, if you've got an answer, you can jump in there.
Yeah, I think what makes the Rapid Response Fund worth funding, it's especially, of course, I refer to this feasibility assessment. So I think it's always a good idea to just plainly, honestly ask yourself, is this worth conservation money? Am I tackling the right species? These are really the questions you have to ask yourself from the beginning. And that feasibility question, you should not take lightly. If you come to the conclusion that there are so many legal barriers or practical operational barriers to implement what you want to do, then maybe that's not the way to go, and you can spend your money on other biodiversity concerns. So that's maybe a hard assessment, but I think that feasibility is rather key, and it includes things like public support. Are the methods available? Are these methods also effective? What are the non-target effects of my management? What's the invasion extent of the species? That's mostly a very good predictor of feasibility, I would say. And this, of course, depends on the species and how fast it reproduces and what is the level of spread in the landscape you are dealing with. But don't just assume that it's not feasible because there might be other options that are going to be put on the table whilst you are doing such a feasibility assessment. So it's not because you deem eradication unfeasible. There is a lot of value in making that assessment also for considering alternative options.
Excellent. Yeah, so it's thinking about what the management objective is, and then perhaps having to think about alternative management objectives if the first one isn't feasible, and maybe even revisiting after a period of time to see if there's new tools or new approaches that could sort of swing that feasibility one way or the other. Okay, super. We talked a bit about partnerships, but in terms of the EU, there's a need to be pulling in the same direction and working together. So there's a question, well, comments and questions here about raccoons. So particularly thinking about in Poland and in Germany and about different nations' approaches here. So the question is, will the IUCN support the European Union and European countries in harmonising their laws and finding effective solutions? So if any of you, I mean, you've all been talking about projects working within country, but have you had an experience of having to work across those political boundaries?
Well, I think Mika has. A little bit, at least, because our bullfrogs are also invading the Netherlands. So maybe she's well placed to deal with that comment.
Yeah, super. Thank you, Mika.
Yeah, we need to be very careful that the bullfrog is not passing the border to the Netherlands. And yeah, it's we had a problem. They escaped from the province of Limburg, not the province I work for. At that border, we have saw that in the water samples there is detected bullfrog. So we are sitting together to see how we can manage it and try to take care about it. So we are planning this together to tackle this again. We once have done it in a European project in Vexel, and then it was a success, and now we are going to try this again. We have already learned a lot, and so we know each other now, and it's very easy when you had the connection together from like a UE project. You can call the person, you know who it is, and you can make agreements, and that's just more easy to do than when you don't know anybody. So we are trying to act fast now. So yeah.
Super, Mika. So that's yeah, great to get the example from the bullfrog and thinking about just making sure that you've got the right contacts. You're letting them know what you're doing, seeing if there's engagement from their side. But I guess this all ties into sort of the feasibility study that Tim was talking about, and actually what you're able to manage to is within the what you are able to control and where you're able to influence. And sometimes, particularly in the example of the raccoon and the differences approaches between Poland and Germany, I think what you can do within one country is therefore, going to be limited by what happens in other countries. And yeah, I guess a need to harmonise laws, approaches, and find effective solutions is key there.
Yeah, I think, Aileen, it's also, don't let yourself get discouraged because the management objectives across borders are not aligned. Okay, I don't think that's a good excuse to not do your own job and divert the responsibility on others. There are international networks. There are people responsible for implementing the EU regulation in our case, and they can be reached. You can just reach out to them and set up international collaborations. It does not necessarily mean you need to mount a LIFE or an Interact project, which is a complicated endeavor. It can be something small scale at the administrative level. People talking to one another is always a good start. So set up those international collaborations, I think, and if you have to discuss aligning management objectives across borders, that is very good, but just don't expect there is a European agency doing that for you. Although the regulation is also clearly mentioned that the European Commission can stimulate and help you set up such collaborations. And I think there are ways, if you just get in touch with them, they can divert you or direct you to the right people.
Yeah, and I think that's really good advice, Tim, but thinking about the different states and countries that are involved. But I think that applies to localized management as well, and different landowners and different land management. It's all about speaking to each other and the different boundaries that can be created there. And often we find that the invasive species, I was pretty taken with your image there of Mika of the closed fence. But it's very evident that the bullfrogs aren't going to adhere to that boundary at all, but it can present a challenge in terms of the management. Okay, so we've been thinking a bit about some of the biodiversity impacts of these invasive species, but also, we mentioned at the beginning that there are economic and health and well-being aspects to an invasion and the impacts that invasive species can have. So how important do you feel that these are in your experience of managing invasions, or are you very focused on the sort of biodiversity aspects? Maybe we could ask Daniel to comment, because I think the lionfish is not an easy species to handle or come across when you're underwater.
Yeah, and biodiversity impact of this species is really great, and it's not only in the Mediterranean but also in the Caribbean. And we have, I would just like to go one question back to mention how I went in Cyprus 2 years ago and I saw the invasion with my own eyes for the first time, and which I was not aware actually, but I'm working with fisheries for last 20 years, and for 2 years I was thinking how to tackle this, because this is going to come to Adriatic Sea and Croatia, and this is when the SOS fund popped up on social media, and I just had idea which I was brewing for 2 years, and we got the funds to tackle it, and now everybody is happy with this, because whole society is using this project basically as a platform for communication. And also it is very, very connected with the countries that have invasion from previous years, like for example Greece, Cyprus, and but also we don't have borders in the sea, and that is the only border that this species is having is temperature, and 10 degrees temperatures is little for this species, and on 20 degrees temperature you have reproduction of females every 2 weeks. And so the amount of the eggs and the new animals coming on every generation is just incredible, and I think that it is very important. I see that 200 people are listening this on this call at least, and I think that this kind of concept must be and should be also applied on other countries in the Mediterranean with regarding to lionfish. But also, of course, it's not only lionfish; it's 100 more species coming from the Red Sea. And at the end, it's not about invasive species, it's about how we behave towards our environment as humans, because we are the invasive species, the biggest one on the planet. So basically it's...
And for the lionfish invasion, are you also seeing economic impacts to the fishery? Maybe perhaps not in Croatia, but maybe in some of the other countries that you've mentioned, where they are more established.
Absolutely, this is the main trigger. This is the let's say the argument where I can get administration, because the fishery in the countries with the high lionfish invasion is gone. So it's in Cyprus, you on the set nets fishery, which is most common fisheries, commercial fisheries, there is 80, 85, 90% of catches this species. And it's completely, it's really fascinating to see how this is happening, and it's very silent. It is localized to Cyprus, and we didn't have communication from Cyprus to Croatia, although we live in the same country and in the same sea. So economical impact of invasive species from the Red Sea is really high, and it's going to change fisheries in Adriatic Sea as it was before. It's going to impact it heavily.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And what about Mika, with the bullfrog? So it's mostly a biodiversity concern, but are there other sort of economic and human well-being health concerns as well?
No, it's mostly like biological response, but the bullfrog eats everything what fits in his mouth. So where the bullfrog is, there is nothing else anymore. So we see when we are catching the bullfrog, the green frogs coming back. So we hear from the owners, they are glad to see the autochthone species back. So yeah, when there is bullfrog, there is nothing else than bullfrog. So yeah, we need to be very careful with the species. And he also rare diseases on him. He doesn't get sick of it, but other species well. So yeah, but it's not really something economic, but that a little bit, because you take a lot of efforts to protect species, and then yeah, when you do, and there appears a bullfrog, he eats everything, also the endangered species.
Wow.
So
yeah, both of these species are just ferocious predators, aren't they? It's
yeah,
astonishing the destruction that they can both cause. Super. So just to sort of start wrapping up our quick Q&A session, what could you maybe all reflect on what thing has the fund, the SOS fund, but allowed you to do that you couldn't have otherwise done? What's the sort of one thing that you'd like to share with others that you've been able to achieve that you wouldn't have been able to do with this rapid response fund? Tim.
Yes, I can comment. For me, coming from, you have to realize, a country where a lot of things were already happening on invasive alien species, and we have several live projects ongoing and long-standing collaborations and good data systems and an early warning tool, etc. So a number of these early detection and rapid response components were already in order, let's say. Still, the fund has been incredibly important for us, especially because it offers the flexibility in terms of the species we can tackle. So we could go beyond the union list. And that for me is probably one of the biggest added values in the Belgian context.
Excellent. Yeah, because sometimes those species that have been listed aren't necessarily the priorities of individual countries. I mean, they're priorities for the countries, but there might be other species as well, and getting funding for those can be challenging when they're not on a list.
Exactly. Yeah. We have no national list. So when we see something potentially risky in a high value conservation area in a nature reserve, we can now act, and we can find an actor and we can tell them, look, there is a fund available. This makes a massive difference in terms of the level of engagement with rapid responses in general.
Yeah, fantastic. Mika, do you want to come in on that? What one thing were you able to do that you couldn't have done before?
It's important we can do it now thoroughly. We have more budget to take eDNA samples, so it's very important to have a better view on the situation. We have more money to buy fikes, to put a team on it, so it's very important. We have money, but not so much money because we need we have a broader area to control. So we are very glad we have extra money to do the isolated population. We can now thoroughly attack them and hopefully eradicate them. So we are very glad with the money.
Fantastic. And Daniel, anything to comment there?
Well, I mean, to have funds to go on the field trips, which are getting more and more expensive on the Croatian islands, that was a deal breaker for us. And without that, we couldn't afford having 6 divers for 5 days on the island of Croatia. So basically, yeah, that was really important for us.
Thank you. Fantastic. Okay, we'll go another question that's come through from the chat and links in with thinking about the impacts and being able to convince people that action is required. So how best do we deal with the scientific uncertainty about impacts of invasive species between the different actors? So the examples come from the Netherlands regional government, where there's lots of discussion between governments about the need to take action, and sometimes the impact is downplayed by some actors. So any advice on for this particular comment?
Yes, that's a very good question, of course, and it's probably the most difficult thing. And we need to reunite as a conservation community, and the regulation and the list associated with the regulation is now uniting us to a certain extent, and still there is a lot of discussion. What I always try to do as a scientist is that I explain to people there is a difference between documented impacts at population level of an invasive alien species and ecological risk. And we are making decisions based on ecological risk. And why are we doing that? Because we can't wait until we know everything about a species, and 4 or 5 PhDs later, when we know everything, the story becomes too nuanced to act anyway. And anyone will always find an argument why not to do something. So at the very heart of the discussion is that we are basing decisions on risk, and not necessarily on evidence. We assess that risk based on the best available scientific evidence, but it's not the same as documented impact. But we don't have that luxury, simply.
That's a very nice message to kind of conclude our question and answer session on, is that there is a need to act early and act fast. And that sometimes is on imperfect evidence. Yeah. So I think we can thank all of our speakers today. I think it's been great hearing the sort of direct experience of receiving the funds and being able to carry out these projects, both from Mika and from Daniel, and the variety of projects and species that Tim covered in his talk as well. It's been superbly informative. And I think most of the questions in the chat have either been answered directly or we've put them to the panel. But please do, if there's remaining questions that you have, there are things that we haven't touched on yet today, do make use of the chat for the remaining minutes of the call. But yeah, no, thank you very much to all of our speakers today for sharing all of their experiences and information. It's been hugely informative. I particularly like hearing about the examples of different management approaches and the opportunity for integrating awareness raising into the projects, so that the communities where the impacts are being felt are part of the solution, and able to engage with the activities that are being undertaken, and building that knowledge and understanding broader throughout the whole communities. So with that, I'm happy to pass back to Anna to give some concluding closing remarks.
Thank you, Eileen, and thank you, everybody, Daniel, Mika, team. I mean, I think it has been incredibly constructive discussion. I've really enjoyed listening to all of you. I mean, for me, one of the strongest messages emerging from today's webinar is that rapid response to invasive alien species is ultimately about collective action. There's no single institution, organization, or country that can tackle these challenges just alone, and success really depends on strong partnerships, on finding that common ground that you team were talking about, and the willingness to act before impacts become irreversible, as well as shared knowledge and early coordination. And I really hope that today's webinar has contributed to that, to sharing these lessons learned and best practices. But I think that also what we have heard today is, I mean, we've been reminded that solutions already exist, and what is needed now is the capacity, the political will, and the investment to scale them up and act with greater urgency. The projects presented today by both Mika and Daniel show the value of targeted support mechanisms, such as the European Rapid Response Fund for Invasive Alien Species, and the importance of enabling practitioners to respond quickly and effectively when new invasions occur. We haven't had the time to present the fund in detail, but I mean, we've provided the link that colleagues can access, and we really hope that the fund that IUCN is managing with funding from the European Union, is really accessible to all of you. So please engage into the call for proposals, apply, and hopefully this generates these networks and collaborations for long-term impact. With that, thanking you all participants, speakers, for your huge dedication to conserving biodiversity and for strengthening resilience against invasive alien species. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye, everyone.